A weary police officer steps out of the shadows, his broad shoulders carrying more than the weight of duty. At his side, a loyal German shepherd scans the silence, ears alert, eyes sharp. And then there's a whisper in the stillness, a frightened child's voice, a girl trembling in the back seat of his car, warning him of a betrayal that could cost him everything. In that moment, the officer realizes this night will change his life forever. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Wishing you a peaceful and inspiring day ahead. Charleston, South Carolina, was a city that always looked like it was caught halfway between memory and dream, but on that night, it was nothing short of haunted. A light drizzle swept over the cobblestone streets, darkening the stones into slick, glassy patches that reflected the golden glow of antique gas lamps. The air was heavy with the briny scent of Charleston Harbor and the faint perfume of magnolia blossoms, stubborn even in the early spring rain. The city hummed softly, as if keeping its secrets tucked beneath the dripping moss that hung from the old live oaks. Detective Ethan Cole stepped out of the precinct and pulled the collar of his navy trench coat closer around his neck. At 41, Ethan was a man carved by the long years of service in a profession that left more scars inside than outside. Tall and broad-shouldered, his presence carried the quiet authority of someone used to command, but also the weariness of a man who had been disappointed too many times. His hair, once a rich dark brown, was now streaked with gray at the temples, and his hazel eyes, sharp as they scanned the dim streets, carried shadows that never fully lifted. Ethan had the look of a man who had given his best years to duty and was still trying to convince himself that it was worth the cost. His personal life had long been collateral damage. His marriage had ended 5 years earlier when his wife could no longer tolerate the long nights, the constant danger, and the emotional distance he carried home after each shift. He had no children, though he often wondered what kind of father he might have been if life had allowed it. What he did have was his partner, four-legged, loyal, and perhaps the only being who never doubted him. Rook, his German shepherd, padded beside him as they left the precinct and walked toward the SUV parked beneath the sprawling branches of an oak. Rook was 6 years old, strong and muscular, his black and silver coat gleaming even in the drizzle, with amber eyes that never stopped assessing the world. The dog had earned his reputation as one of the sharpest K9s on the force, capable of finding what no one else could, and fearless in situations that would make seasoned officers hesitate. Yet outside of work, Rook had an oddly gentle spirit. He would curl at Ethan's feet when the detective read late into the night, or press his head into Ethan's palm when he sensed his handler's mood darken. Rook had scars along his flank from a knife attack during a raid 2 years prior, and Ethan still remembered carrying the dog to the vet, heart pounding harder than it had ever done in the line of duty. Since then, their bond had only deepened. Together, man and dog were a team, but also something more. Companions against the silence of empty homes and echoing thoughts. Ethan walked with the kind of cautious pace that came from decades in law enforcement, every sound and shadow registered in his periphery. The rain-slicked cobblestones clicked. Beneath his polished black boots, the echo swallowed by the soft patter of drizzle. The city seemed quiet, too quiet. Charleston streets at night could be romantic for tourists, but for Ethan, they often carried a sense of unease, as if history itself whispered warnings through the oaks. He reached his SUV, a black Chevy Tahoe, and clicked the fob. The locks released with a muted click, and he slid into the driver's seat. Rook climbing into the back with a shake that sent droplets scattering. For a moment, Ethan let the scent of leather and faint cedar from the last detailing fill his senses, a small refuge from the storm outside. Then, suddenly, everything shifted. Cold fingers pressed firmly over his mouth. His body tensed instantly, every muscle coiling, but before he could react, a small trembling voice whispered urgently in his ear, "Don't say anything. They're listening." His eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror, and what he saw nearly made his heart seize. Huddled in the back seat, pressed low against the seatbelt, was a little girl. No older than 6, she had tangled chestnut brown hair plastered to her damp cheeks, her pale skin smudged with dirt, and eyes that were far too wide and haunted for her age. Hazel, sharp and trembling with fear, They locked on his own with desperate intensity. Ethan's instincts, trained to assess threats, recalibrated instantly. This was no attacker. It was a child, terrified but resolute. Slowly he reached up and gently pulled her small hand from his mouth. His voice was low, steady, the way he spoke to witnesses in shock. "Who are you? What are you doing in my car?" She leaned forward, clutching the back of his seat with fingers that were small but fierce in their grip. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking but still insistent. "Don't talk loud. They're out there. The people who want to hurt you." Ethan's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "Who's out there?" The girl glanced nervously toward the fog-shrouded street beyond the windshield, her shoulders stiff. "They said you'd be here. They've been watching you. They said Thursday would be the end." Ethan studied her, scanning for signs of manipulation, for rehearsed lines. But what he saw instead was raw, unfiltered fear. "Where did you hear this?" She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "In the old seafood warehouse down by the docks. I sleep there sometimes when it's too cold outside. They didn't see me, but I heard them say your name, over and over. They know where you go, what you drive. They said you won't see it coming." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. It wasn't possible for a random child to know his name, his schedule, unless she truly had overheard something. He tried to dismiss it, tried to tell himself it was coincidence, but the certainty in her eyes cut deeper than doubt. "I think you're mistaken," he said quietly, though even he didn't believe the words. She shook her head, wet hair clinging to her face. "I'm not wrong. You gave me food once, remember? A sandwich and some money. You didn't ask me for anything. No one else ever did that." Ethan's memory flickered. Months earlier, in the dead of winter, he had been late for a meeting and noticed a small figure shivering under the overhang of a building near the precinct. He had handed the child a wrapped sandwich and a $5 bill without a word, then hurried off. He had not thought about it since. Now, here she was, reminding him with unwavering conviction. "You remembered that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "No one's ever been kind to me without wanting something back," she said. Her gaze steadied, anchored by a kind of fragile courage. "When I heard them talking about you, I knew I had to warn you." Ethan exhaled slowly, disbelief and unease warring inside him. He wanted to think she was just a scared homeless child weaving a story. But something about the way she spoke, the way she clutched the seat as though it were her only tether, told him otherwise. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Lila," she whispered. "Lila Harper." He repeated it softly, almost to ground himself. "Lila." At that moment, Rook, who had been lying alert in the back, let out a low, guttural growl, his amber eyes locked on something beyond the window. Ethan's own gaze snapped forward, following the line of the dog's tension. Under the dim halo of the street lamp, a tall figure stood perfectly still, cloaked in a long raincoat, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. Even from that distance, Ethan could feel the man's gaze fixed squarely on the SUV. His stomach knotted. The drizzle fell harder, tapping against the windshield like a drumbeat of warning. Lila's small voice cut through the silence, sharper now, urgent. "It's him!" Drive Ethan's hand moved to the ignition, his instincts igniting as quickly as the Tahoe's engine. The man began to walk, slow, deliberate steps echoing against the stones, as if the street belonged to him. The rhythm of his approach was unhurried, confident, predatory. Ethan's pulse quickened. Rook barked sharply and Lila clutched the seat. "Now!" she hissed. Ethan put the car into gear, pulling away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, he saw the silhouette stop in the middle of the street, unmoving, watching as they drove off into the mist. His figure shrank into the blur of rain and fog, but Ethan knew this was no coincidence. It was the beginning of something far darker. The rain thickened as Ethan steered the Tahoe through Charleston's narrow streets, the wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the windshield. The old city seemed deserted, its historic brick facades and wrought iron balconies fading into shadows under the mist. Street lamps cast watery halos across the slick cobblestones, and every corner felt like it might conceal a threat. In the rearview mirror, the image of the man in the raincoat lingered in his mind like a phantom, though he could no longer see him. Rook's ears were pricked, body tense in the back seat, his amber eyes flicking between Lila and the windows as if ready to spring at the slightest sign of danger. Lila hugged her knees to her chest, her small body trembling, though the heater was on. Her oversized sweater was damp, clinging to her thin frame, and her shoes were worn nearly through at the soles. Ethan studied her in the mirror. 6 years old, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived far longer in suffering. "Lila," he said in a low, steady tone, meant to reassure, "I need you to tell me everything you heard." She leaned forward, her small chin resting against the back of his seat. "They were in the warehouse by the docks," she said. "I hide there when it's cold. I sleep under the nets. I heard them talking about Thursday. They knew what time you leave work, where you eat, where you park. They knew your car. They said you wouldn't see it coming." Her voice faltered, but she forced herself to go on. "They said your name over and over. Detective Cole. Detective Cole." Like they were practicing it. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. He lived his life methodically, avoiding unnecessary risks. He rotated restaurants to avoid being predictable, or so he thought. The idea that strangers had mapped his routine unsettled him in ways bullets never had. "Who were they?" he asked. Lila shook her head. "I don't know all their names, but I heard a man called Bobby and a woman called Evelyn. They laughed a lot. They said Thursday is the day Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Bobby Langston was a name from long ago, a college acquaintance who had once applied to the academy, but failed the background check. He had resurfaced in Charleston as a business consultant, someone Ethan occasionally crossed paths with at civic events. Evelyn Grant, however, was a name too close for comfort. She was the department's civilian liaison, a sharp, efficient woman in her 30s who managed paperwork and scheduling for several senior officers. Tall and slim, with blonde hair always tied in a severe bun, and an expression that could switch from polite charm to icy detachment in a heartbeat. She had built a reputation as indispensable. Ethan had never considered her dangerous, until now. Rook growled suddenly, low and guttural, and Ethan's eyes darted to the side mirror. For an instant he thought he saw a shadow slip between the alleys, but the drizzle blurred everything. He pressed the accelerator, guiding the SUV into a broader avenue lined with shuttered storefronts. "It's all right, boy," he murmured to Rook, though the words felt hollow. Lila tugged gently at his sleeve. "You don't believe me?" she said, her voice small but certain. Ethan glanced at her in the mirror, seeing her lips pressed tight, her hazel eyes clouded with hurt. "I do believe you," he answered, "but believing means we're in more danger than I like to admit." He tried to soften his tone. "You've done something very brave, Lila, but I need to keep you safe now. That comes first." She shook her head with a sudden stubbornness. "They'll follow you. If you take me somewhere and leave me, they'll still come after you. I have to stay with you." The defiance in her voice startled him. For a child who had clearly endured hunger and cold, she had also grown a resilience that bordered on fierce loyalty. Ethan thought of the sandwich he had given her months ago, a gesture so small to him, but clearly monumental to her. In a life where kindness was rare, she had decided that one act made him worth risking everything for. The drizzle turned into sheets of rain as they reached the waterfront district. Ethan parked near a low-lit diner whose neon sign buzzed faintly in the wet air. He knew the owner, a man named Gus Miller, who had been running the place for 30 years. Gus was in his late 50s, with a barrel chest, thinning hair, and a gruff voice softened by years of serving night shift workers and cops on late runs. He was a man who had seen enough to keep his mouth shut and his coffee hot. Ethan guided Lila inside, Rook following obediently at his heel, shaking water onto the tile floor. The diner smelled of fried food and burnt coffee, but it was warm. Gus looked up from behind the counter, his eyes narrowing slightly when he saw the girl and the dripping dog. But he only grunted. "Evening, detective?" "Rough night?" Ethan gave a brief nod. "Something like that. We'll take the back booth." Gus shrugged, grabbing mugs and pouring coffee before Ethan even asked. In the booth, Lila pressed herself against the vinyl seat, her eyes darting nervously toward the windows. Rook sat at the edge of the table, his gaze locked on the door. Ethan leaned in, speaking low. "These names, Bobby and Evelyn, are you sure you heard them clearly?" Lila nodded emphatically. I don't forget names. Not when they talk about hurting people. Ethan believed her. Children like Lila, forced to survive on the streets, developed sharp memories out of necessity. Forgetting details could mean danger. Gus ambled over with their mugs, his apron stained, his expression unreadable. Kid looks like she hasn't had a decent meal in days, he muttered, sliding a plate of pie in front of Lila. On the house. Lila's eyes widened, and for the first time since she appeared in his car, Ethan saw a flicker of childlike wonder in her face. She whispered a quiet, "Thank you," and Gus gave her a nod before shuffling back to the counter. Ethan studied the steam curling from his coffee, his mind running through possibilities. If Bobby Langston and Evelyn Grant were truly involved, this wasn't just office politics. This was betrayal that cut deep into the department. Lila's warning wasn't just about him. It might be about the integrity of the force itself. He exhaled, leaning back. Lila, I need you to tell me one more thing. Why help me? You could have just run away. She lowered her gaze to the pie, tracing the edge of the plate with one small finger. Because you were the only one who ever saw me and didn't look away. Her words hit him harder than any confession. Rook let out another low growl, ears swiveling toward the door. Ethan followed his gaze and froze. Through the rain-streaked glass, under the halo of a street lamp, the man in the raincoat stood once more. He was perfectly still, his posture too deliberate to be casual, his face shadowed, but his gaze unmistakably fixed on them. The rhythm of the rain filled the silence as Ethan and Lila stared at the figure. Drive, Lila whispered again, her voice urgent. Ethan placed a hand on Rook's back, feeling the taut readiness of the dog's muscles, then nodded slowly. We will, he said, his voice steady. But this time, we don't just run. We start figuring out who we're up against. The rain had slowed into a mist by the time Ethan left the diner, but Charleston streets still glistened under the yellow glow of gas lamps, their halos stretching across cobblestones like stained glass. Rook padded close by his side, every movement alert, while Lila clutched his coat sleeve tightly, her small figure shivering despite the warmth inside the Tahoe. The man in the raincoat was gone by the time they stepped out, but Ethan knew better than to think they were safe. Watching, not attacking. That was the strategy of someone confident he already held the advantage. Ethan pulled out of the diner lot, tires hissing against wet pavement, and steered the SUV toward the waterfront. He had one thought. If Lila heard Bobby and Evelyn in the seafood warehouse, he had to see it himself. The waterfront at night was a different world. The smell of brine and old rope hung thick in the air. Gulls squawked restlessly above the piers, and the silhouettes of shrimp boats rocked gently in their slips. Ethan parked near an abandoned bait shop and killed the engine. We'll check it out, he said softly, turning to Lila. But you stay in the car with Rook. Her hazel eyes widened, and she shook her head stubbornly. If I don't go, you won't find the right spot. I know where they talk. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. She was right. He couldn't search blindly. He nodded slowly. Fine. But you do exactly what I say. They slipped through the fog, the old boards creaking under their feet as they moved closer to the looming gray warehouse. Its siding was streaked with salt stains, its high windows clouded with years of grime, and a faint light glowed from inside, spilling like a warning across the wet dock. Ethan crouched near a stack of nets, Rook at his side, muscles taut. Lila crouched beside him, her small hand gripping the edge of his coat. She pointed toward a side door near a row of shrimp nets. That's where I go in? The latch sticks. You have to lift while you push. Ethan nodded, impressed by her memory and resourcefulness. He tested the door, and it opened just as she said, with a muted scrape. Inside, the air was metallic, a mix of salt and oil. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor, and the faint hum of an ice machine filled the silence. They moved between stacks of wooden pallets and barrels until voices carried faintly from a side room. Ethan motioned for Lila to stay low, then crept forward with Rook close at his heel. Through the narrow gap of a door left ajar, Ethan could see a table cluttered with papers, a tablet lying face down, and 2 coffee mugs half full. He strained to hear. The voices belonged to a man and a woman. The man's tone was smooth, confident, laced with the arrogance of someone used to being obeyed. The woman's voice was sharper, precise, every word deliberate. Ethan's chest tightened. Bobby Langston and Evelyn Grant. Thursdays, confirmed, Bobby was saying. He won't see it coming. By the time he realizes, the papers will already be signed. Evelyn's heels click softly on the floor. He's too careful. We have to make sure his routine traps him, not frees him. The man in the coat is already in place. He'll push him where we want him. Bobby laughed low. Then it's done. We're finished babysitting him. Ethan's stomach turned. They weren't just talking about his career. They were talking about him like a problem to be erased. Rook let out a low growl, and Ethan gently pressed a hand to his neck, silencing him. Lila's eyes met his, wide and fearful, but steady. She had been telling the truth all along. Footsteps echoed suddenly across the warehouse floor, closer than the voices in the side room. Ethan froze. A new figure was approaching from the main entrance. Through the haze of dim light, a tall man appeared, late 50s, with a gaunt face and a limp in his stride. His raincoat was dark, his hat pulled low, and a scar ran from his left temple down across his cheek, like a jagged reminder of violence past. This was not Bobby or Evelyn. This was someone else, someone who radiated quiet menace. He carried himself with the precision of a soldier, though his eyes flicked constantly, restless, like a predator searching the shadows. Lila's fingers dug into Ethan's coat. "That's him," she whispered. "The one I saw." Ethan studied the man, noting every detail. He was not someone local. His posture screamed military, maybe mercenary. Whoever Bobby and Evelyn had pulled in, they weren't amateurs. They retreated silently, slipping back toward the side door before the stranger could catch their scent. Outside, the mist wrapped them in its cover again. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had proof now, at least enough to know the threat was real, but proof was worthless without a plan. As they hurried back to the Tahoe, Rook suddenly stopped, his body stiff, nose lifted to the damp night air. Then he tugged toward a narrow alley beside the bait shop. Ethan followed his lead cautiously, hand brushing the grip of his sidearm. At the end of the alley, huddled beneath a tattered tarp, was a man Ethan recognized, Walter Jennings, a retired dock worker in his 70s, who often lingered near the marina. Walter had a weathered face, leathery from years under the sun, his hands calloused and permanently stained with oil. His gray beard was unkempt, his jacket patched in several places. Walter had once been a fixture at the docks, known for his blunt honesty and an easy laugh, until his son died in an accident on one of the boats. Since then, the laugh had gone, replaced by bitterness and whiskey. Walter squinted up at Ethan, his eyes bloodshot. "Detective Cole," he rasped, his voice gravelly from drink and age. "You shouldn't be here. Bad men talk in that place. I seen them come and go." Ethan crouched slightly. "Walter, what did you see?" Walter wiped a trembling hand across his beard. "Two of them, fancy clothes, suits, not dock folk, and a woman with them, sharp eyes, cold as ice. They meet late, talk quiet, but I hear enough. They want you gone, Cole. You stirred something you don't even know about." His words slurred slightly, but the fear behind them was real. Ethan placed a steady hand on Walter's shoulder. "If you see them again, you come find me." "Understand?" Walter nodded weakly, his gaze darting nervously toward the warehouse. "You got that dog with you? Good. You'll need him." Back in the Tahoe, Lila hugged Rook tightly, her face buried in his fur. Ethan watched her, realizing how fragile her courage truly was. She had survived hunger, cold, and loneliness, but she was still a child, trembling in the shadows of conspiracies she barely understood. He felt a protective resolve harden in his chest. Whatever Bobby and Evelyn were planning, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about this girl who had risked everything to warn him. As the SUV pulled away from the docks, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text message flashed across the screen. Meeting moved to Wednesday. Be ready. E.g. Evelyn Grant. His jaw tightened. They were accelerating. Time was running shorter than he thought. The Charleston morning broke heavy with fog, thick curtains of gray that muffled the sounds of the harbor and painted the city in muted tones. Ethan stood at his kitchen window, a mug of coffee untouched in his hand, staring at the veil of mist rolling across the streets like an omen. His Tahoe sat in the driveway, wet from the night's rain, and inside his chest, the weight of Evelyn's message from the night before still pressed hard. The meeting had been moved up to Wednesday. That gave him less than 48 hours. Rook lay near the back door, his black and silver fur glistening faintly in the dim light. Eyes alert, though he looked like he was resting. Lila was asleep upstairs, curled under a blanket on the guest bed, her small figure finally still after hours of restless shifting. Ethan's phone buzzed again, the screen lit with a name that stirred old trust, Captain Marcus Harlan. Marcus had been Ethan's superior for years, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s with a stern jawline, close-cropped gray hair, and eyes the pale blue of steel. His career had been forged in tough beats and violent cases, but beneath his gruff exterior was a deep loyalty to his officers. He had once saved Ethan's life during a raid gone wrong, dragging him out under fire when Ethan had been pinned down. Since then, Ethan had never doubted the man's courage, but after last night, he doubted everyone. The call connected. Marcus's voice was steady, almost too steady. "Cole, I got wind that you were at the docks last night. Is that true?" Ethan hesitated, weighing his words. "Maybe." "Why?" Marcus's pause was brief but heavy. "Because word's spreading that you're sniffing where you shouldn't. I don't need to remind you what happens when a detective stirs up the wrong nest." Ethan leaned against the counter, his eyes narrowing. "What nest are we talking about, Captain?" Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, his voice softened, almost fatherly. "Watch yourself, Cole. Not everyone wearing a badge is working for the same cause." The line clicked dead. Ethan stared at the phone, unease crawling up his spine. Marcus had always been his anchor in the department, but now even that felt uncertain. He set the phone down, his mind grinding through possibilities. Either Marcus was warning him sincerely, or he was warning him to back off for reasons more sinister. Either way, Ethan couldn't afford to show his cards. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Lila padded into the kitchen, her hair tangled, sweater too big for her small frame, but her hazel eyes alert despite sleep. "He called, didn't he?" she asked quietly, surprising him. Ethan raised a brow. "You hear everything, don't you?" She shrugged, climbing into a chair at the table. "When you grow up hiding, you learn to listen through walls." She glanced at Rook, who lifted his head to nuzzle her hand. "He listens too." Ethan poured her a glass of milk, sliding it across the table. She sipped slowly, her thin fingers gripping the glass tightly. "They're scared of you," she said softly. "That's why they're rushing. People don't rush unless they're scared." Her simple words carried a clarity that struck Ethan deeper than Marcus's carefully measured warning. Later that morning, Ethan decided to visit someone outside the circle of cops and criminals alike. Clara Ramirez, a local journalist known for digging into stories others were too afraid to touch. Clara was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with olive-toned skin and long, dark hair often tied back loosely. Her sharp brown eyes had earned her a reputation for seeing through lies, and her wardrobe was simple, jeans, boots, and button-down shirts that suggested she valued function over form. Clara had once uncovered a corruption scandal in the city council, and though it earned her enemies, it also earned her grudging respect. She carried herself with the calm persistence of someone who had seen enough threats to stop fearing them. They met at a small coffee shop tucked off King Street, the kind of place where college kids worked on laptops and no one paid attention to two people sitting in a corner booth. Clara leaned forward, notebook open, pen tapping lightly. "You wouldn't have called me unless it was serious," she said. Ethan sipped his coffee, his eyes steady. "It's Bobby Langston and Evelyn Grant. They're planning something, bigger than a power grab. They've got muscle, a man in a raincoat who's been shadowing me." Clara's brow furrowed slightly, but her voice remained calm. "You have proof?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. Just words, sightings, whispers." Clara tapped her pen again. "Whispers aren't enough. But if what you're saying is true, it'll leave a trail. Deals always do. I'll start digging into Bobby's financials. Evelyn's too. Someone that careful doesn't hide money well forever." As they spoke, Ethan noticed a young barista clearing tables nearby. She was no more than 20, petite with pale blonde hair tucked under a knit cap, her freckled face bright but watchful. Her name tag read, Jenny. She hummed softly as she worked, but her gaze lingered too long on their booth. When she returned to the counter, Ethan caught Clara's eye. Clara followed his look and gave a faint nod. "I'll ask around. If someone's tailing you, they may already know you'd come to me." Ethan felt Rook shift at his feet under the table, the German shepherd's body tense, ears flicking toward the barista's direction. By midday, Ethan returned to the Tahoe, Rook jumping in first before Lila climbed into the back seat. As he drove, his phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. "You're in over your head. Walk away or drown." The words were blunt and the timing too precise to ignore. He erased the message, immediately, unwilling to let Lila see. That evening, Ethan took Lila and Rook to stay at the home of an old family friend, Martha Caldwell, a widowed woman in her late 60s, who had once been his mother's closest confidant. Martha was tall and thin, with silver hair always pinned neatly, her sharp cheekbones softened by kind gray eyes. Her house, a small clapboard structure with lavender shutters, smelled faintly of cinnamon and clean linen. Martha had lost her husband to cancer years ago, and since then, she had opened her home to boarders and strays alike. She greeted Ethan warmly, her embrace brief but sincere. "You look tired, son," she said, her voice firm but caring. When she noticed Lila, her face softened instantly. "And who's this little one?" Lila hesitated, clutching Rook's fur, but Martha crouched slightly to meet her eyes. "Don't worry, child. No one bothers kids in this house." Something in Martha's steady gaze reassured Lila, and she gave a small nod. Ethan knew Martha's house would be safe for the night. As darkness settled, Ethan sat on Martha's porch, Rook stretched at his feet, ears flicking at every distant sound. His phone buzzed again, this time Clara. Her message was short. "I found something. Meet me at the archives first thing tomorrow. Bring no one." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the day pressing against him. Inside, he could hear Lila's soft laughter for the first time, Martha's voice soothing as they prepared dinner. The sound struck Ethan like a reminder of what he was fighting for. The mist was rolling in again, the city preparing to bury its secrets in another veil of gray. And Ethan knew time was running out. The morning fog clung stubbornly to Charleston's streets, wrapping the city in a pale shroud that seemed to muffle even the sound of passing cars. Ethan Cole drove slowly through the haze, his Tahoe's headlights cutting thin beams across the cobblestone avenues. Rook sat alert in the passenger seat, his black and silver coat gleaming faintly as he shifted, nose twitching at the damp air. Ethan hadn't told Lila the full truth when he left her with Martha Caldwell that morning. He only promised he'd be back before nightfall. The girl had looked at him with wary eyes, clutching Rook's collar, before finally letting him go with a whisper. "Don't trust anyone too quick." The Charleston City Archives stood like a sentinel of another age, an imposing brick structure with arched windows and tall columns at its entrance, its weathered stone steps slick with mist. Inside, the air was cool, filled with the faint scent of old paper and polished oak. Ethan stepped through the heavy doors, his boots echoing against the marble floor, and spotted Clara Ramirez waiting near the reference desk. She wore a dark trench coat over jeans, her long hair pulled back, eyes sharp with both fatigue and determination. Clara had clearly spent the night digging. She gestured him toward a side hallway, away from the librarian's curious gaze. "I couldn't bring this out," she whispered. "Too many eyes. But I found something you need to see." She led him to a quiet reading room, tucked behind rows of mahogany shelves. The room's only other occupant was an elderly archivist named Walter Green. Walter was a thin man, in his 70s, with stooped shoulders, wisps of white hair combed carefully back, and large round glasses perched on his nose. His tweed vest and neatly knotted tie gave him a scholarly air, but his watchful eyes suggested he missed little. Walter greeted Clara with a nod, his voice soft but steady. "Found what you were looking for?" Clara's smile was polite but restrained. "More than I expected." Walter returned to sorting papers at a nearby desk, leaving them in peace. Clara spread several files across the long oak table. "Bobby Langston has been funneling money through shell companies tied to historic property acquisitions. It's not just about contracts, it's about land influence. Evelyn's name appears on transfer documents. But there's more. She slid one worn folder closer to Ethan. This was buried in records from 20 years ago. It lists the founding board members of a holding group tied to those properties. Bobby's name is there, yes. But so is Captain Marcus Harlan. Ethan's jaw tightened. His mentor, the man who once dragged him out of gunfire, had his name on the same paper trail as the people plotting against him now. Clara watched his face carefully. I don't think it's coincidence. And if Harlan's in this deep, then the warning he gave you yesterday wasn't just concern, it was cover. Before Ethan could answer, the door creaked and a woman entered with a cart of books. She was small, no more than 30, with sandy hair pinned neatly under a librarian's cap, freckles dusting her cheeks. Her badge read, Emily Carter. She smiled faintly as she wheeled the cart toward the shelves, her movements efficient, almost too precise. Rook's ears pricked, his amber eyes following her every step. Emily glanced at the dog and hesitated, her smile flickering before she continued stacking books. Ethan made a note of her unease. Clara lowered her voice. They'll know I've been digging soon. I can't hold this alone. You need to decide how much you're willing to expose. Ethan studied the papers, his pulse steady but cold. I'm not letting them push me out. Not at work, not in this city. But if Harlan's compromised, I can't go through the department. Walter suddenly cleared his throat, his frail frame straightening as he approached. Pardon me, detective, but if you plan to fight people who bury their secrets in paper, you'll need allies who know how to read between the lines. His voice carried a quiet gravity. Ethan regarded him carefully. And that would be you? Walter's lips curved in a faint smile. I've worked here longer than some of those names have held power. Men like Bobby leave fingerprints. They can erase digital trails, but not ink on paper. If you trust me, I'll keep an eye out for any requests tied to those files. Clara gave Ethan a pointed look. Another possible ally, though age had slowed Walter's body, not his mind. The morning stretched into early afternoon as Clara outlined her findings and Ethan weighed his next step. But just as they prepared to leave, Emily reappeared near the door, her cart empty now. She pretended to fuss with the lock, though her eyes flicked toward the table where the files lay. Ethan's instincts sharpened. Clara noticed too and leaned close. She's listening. Ethan gathered the documents swiftly, tucking them into his jacket. As they exited, Emily's polite smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. Outside, the fog had thinned, but the streets glistened with damp. Ethan walked Clara to her car, Rook at his side, his mind heavy with what they'd uncovered. Bobby and Evelyn were pulling strings. Harlan's name was tangled in the same net, and now even the quiet sanctuary of the archives felt watched. Before she drove off, Clara gripped his arm. Whatever happens Thursday, you need undeniable proof. What I've given you is a trail, but it's not the weapon. Find the weapon. She slid into her car and disappeared into the thinning mist. Ethan stood for a long moment, Rook pressing against his leg, the weight of betrayal pressing harder than ever. When he returned to Martha's, the porch light glowed warmly against the dusk. Inside, he found Lila sitting cross-legged on the rug, teaching Rook to paw at a deck of playing cards she'd spread on the floor. Martha sat in her rocker nearby, knitting with quiet focus, her silver hair shining in the lamplight. For the first time in days, the house felt like a pocket of peace. Lila looked up, her face lighting briefly before fading into seriousness. You found something, didn't you? Ethan knelt to ruffle her hair. Maybe, but it means we have to be even more careful. That night, as Martha dozed and Lila finally slept, Ethan sat on the porch with Rook curled at his feet. He studied the folder again under the porch lamp, Marcus Harlan's name etched in neat type among the founding members. The fog was rolling back in, carrying with it the same uneasy stillness he had felt the night he first found Lila in his car. Somewhere beyond the mist, enemies were moving pieces into place, and tomorrow, Ethan knew, he would have to confront the truth about the man who once saved his life. Charleston woke under a restless sky, the fog drifting inland until the harbor disappeared into pale white and the rooftops looked like lonely islands. Ethan Cole parked his Tahoe outside the police precinct just after dawn, the kind of hour when the building still hummed with tired night shift officers finishing their paperwork and fresh uniforms rubbing their eyes as they clocked in. He adjusted his jacket, tugged at the folder hidden beneath it, and glanced down at Rook in the passenger seat. The German Shepherd's amber eyes were locked on him, as if the dog knew the weight of what Ethan was about to face. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The front desk officer, a young woman named Tara Mills, greeted Ethan with a polite nod. Tara was in her mid-20s with short blonde hair tucked behind one ear and a friendly face that still carried the softness of someone new to the job. Her uniform fit stiffly, her belt slightly too loose, but her eyes shone with eagerness. "Morning, Detective Cole." Captain Harlan's already in his office. Ethan returned the nod, but noticed her gaze drift nervously toward Rook, whose steady presence seemed to unsettle her. "He's with someone?" Ethan asked. Tara shook her head. "Just got in." "He's alone." The walk to Harlan's office felt longer than usual. Marcus Harlan had been more than a superior. He had once been a mentor, a man who'd hauled Ethan from the wreckage of a raid gone wrong a decade ago, when shrapnel had cut his arm and smoke filled his lungs. Harlan had been there through the recovery, through Ethan's divorce, through the nights when the badge felt heavier than a man could carry. But now, his name sat on a paper trail that led straight to betrayal. Ethan knocked once before entering. The office smelled of leather and tobacco, and the blinds were half drawn against the pale morning light. Marcus Harlan sat behind his desk, his broad shoulders hunched slightly. The dark blue uniform stretched across a body that still held the bulk of his younger years, but had softened with age. His hair, once jet black, was now iron gray at the temples, his mustache trimmed with precision. His eyes, pale blue, sharp as glass, lifted from the paperwork in front of him. "Cole," he said, voice steady, but with the rasp of a man who had smoked too long. "You look like hell." Ethan closed the door behind him, Rook sitting obediently at his heel. "Been a long week." Harlan studied him for a moment, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. Ethan didn't sit. He placed the folder on the desk instead, sliding it forward. "I need you to explain this." Harlan's brow furrowed as he opened the folder, scanning the papers. His face barely shifted, but Ethan caught the subtle tightening around his jaw, the slow inhale through his nose. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter," Ethan said, his voice low. "Your name's on it, alongside Bobby Langston and Evelyn Shaw, a holding group funneling money into land grabs, acquisitions. These are the same names tied to threats against me. So tell me why I shouldn't believe you're in on it." The silence stretched. Rook's ears twitched at the tension. Finally, Harlan leaned back, his chair creaking. "You think I'd sell you out?" he asked, his tone calm but edged with steel. "I think you've been playing both sides for a long time," Ethan replied. Harlan exhaled slowly, then stood, moving to the window. The morning light cut his profile into stark lines, an aging officer who carried both authority and shadows. "When you've been in this job as long as I have, you learn the city doesn't run on justice alone. It runs on deals, on power. Those papers, yes, my name's on them. But not because I wanted what Bobby wanted. I put my name there years ago to watch them, to keep a hand in their game so they couldn't move without me knowing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And you never thought to tell me?" "You weren't ready," Harlan said simply, turning to face him. "And maybe you still aren't. But if Bobby and Evelyn are moving now, it means they're done hiding. It means I failed to keep them in check." Ethan studied him, trying to read the truth in his eyes. The man who had once been his anchor now looked like someone balancing on the edge of guilt and defiance. "Then prove it," Ethan said. "Help me stop them. Or I'll treat you like I treat them." For the first time, a flicker of sadness crossed Harlan's face. He nodded once. "Fair enough." Before Ethan could respond, the door cracked open. Tara Mills poked her head inside, her blonde hair slightly mussed as if she had hurried. "Sorry, Captain, but there's someone asking for Detective Cole. Says it's urgent." Her eyes flicked nervously to Ethan before darting away. In the hallway stood a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a pale green blouse and a navy skirt, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Her name tag read Janine Porter. She was a social worker, One Ethan had crossed paths with years ago on a domestic case. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, her expression tight with urgency. "Ethan," she said, gripping the strap of her bag. "It's about the girl you're protecting." Lila Ethan stiffened. "What about her?" Janine lowered her voice. "There are people asking questions at the shelters. Men I don't recognize. They're describing her. Storm gray eyes, chestnut hair, offering money for information. I thought you should know." Ethan's stomach knotted. He glanced at Harlan, who was already frowning deeply, his hand tightening on the edge of his desk. "Thank you, Janine," Ethan said, his voice measured. Janine gave him a look that carried both concern and warning. She had always been the kind of woman who carried others' burdens quietly, broad-shouldered not in frame, but in spirit. Years working with neglected children had left her patient, empathetic, but also deeply cautious. "I'll keep looking out," she added, before retreating down the hall. When she was gone, Ethan turned back to Harlan. "They're closing in. And if they find her, this gets worse." Harlan rubbed a hand over his face. "Then you'll need allies, real ones, and you'll need to decide quick who you trust. Bobby won't wait until Thursday to tighten the noose." Ethan left the office with Rook at his side, the folder still under his arm, but heavier now, with questions instead of answers. Tara gave him a hesitant smile as he passed, though her eyes flicked again toward the dog, as if afraid of what he sensed that she couldn't. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, but the city felt no less shadowed. That night, back at Martha's, Ethan found Lila sitting by the window, her sketchbook open. She had drawn 3 figures, 2 tall, 1 small between them. When he asked, she shrugged, her storm gray eyes unreadable. "It's us," she whispered, "but one of them might not stay." Ethan crouched beside her, his hand on Rook's back. "We'll stay," he said firmly. Yet even as he spoke, he wasn't sure if he was promising her or himself. Charleston's fog had thinned by the time dusk fell, but the harbor carried a restless energy, the kind that made even seasoned fishermen glance twice at shadows stretching along the water. Detective Ethan Cole guided his Tahoe through the narrow streets near the marina, headlights cutting through mist that curled like smoke around the wooden pilings. At his side, Rook sat alert, ears pricked, his black and silver fur bristling faintly, as if the dog could sense what lay ahead. The day had been long, and the words of Captain Harlan still gnawed at Ethan's mind. Was the man truly working as a double agent inside Bobby Langston's network, or was that simply the cover story of a betrayer? Ethan didn't have the luxury of certainty anymore. And now, Janine Porter's warning about men asking after Lila meant their timeline was shrinking fast. He parked near an abandoned bait shop, its weathered paint peeling and roof sagging. Clara Reynolds waited in her unmarked sedan a few yards away, leaning against the hood with her hands buried in her jacket pockets. Clara was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with a posture that carried the easy readiness of years in law enforcement. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a braid, a few strands loose around her angular face. There was a quiet intensity about her, the kind of woman who measured words carefully and spoke with weight when she chose to. Ethan had worked alongside her before, on smaller cases, and knew she was steady, pragmatic, and unshaken by danger. Tonight, her expression was taut, eyes narrowed against the dusk. "You're late," she said, her tone clipped but not without concern. "Had to make sure Lila was settled," Ethan replied, stepping out with Rook at his side. "Martha's watching her, but I don't like leaving them alone too long." Clara's expression softened briefly. "Martha's tougher than she looks, and that girl, she's sharper than most adults I know." Ethan gave a faint nod, though his gut remained uneasy. Together, they turned toward the stretch of warehouses lining the dockside. One in particular still glowed faintly with light bleeding from high windows, its rust-streaked siding standing out against the gloom. "Langston and Shaw have been using that one," Clara said, jerking her chin toward it. "Anonymous shell companies on the lease, but it tracks. I've seen comings and goings at odd hours. Tonight's our chance to catch them in the middle of it." Ethan crouched beside Rook, resting a hand on the dog's back. Rook's amber eyes followed the warehouse as though it were prey. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, muscled and strong, with a faint scar across his muzzle from a training accident. His instincts were sharp, his loyalty absolute, and Ethan trusted him as much as he trusted any partner. They moved along the edge of the dock, staying in shadows. The damp boards creaked softly underfoot, and the scent of brine mixed with diesel hung heavy in the air. As they neared the warehouse, Ethan noticed movement. A figure standing near a side door, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture too rigid to be casual. He was likely a guard. "Clara, take a closer look," Ethan murmured. Clara nodded, slipping ahead with the fluid ease of someone who knew how to disappear into corners. As Ethan waited, Rook shifted, ears twitching. From the opposite direction came the faint clatter of a bicycle. A boy of about 12 coasted to a stop, his face thin, dirt smudged across his cheek. His clothes were worn, jeans too short at the ankles, and his sneakers were frayed at the toes. He carried a canvas sack slung across his shoulder, heavy with the sound of clinking bottles. "You're not from around here," the boy said, squinting at Ethan. His voice carried suspicion, but not hostility. Ethan straightened. "Just working." The boy sniffed. "Everyone works here, mister. Some just work for the wrong people." "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Derek," the boy replied, gripping his handlebars tighter. His dark eyes flicked toward the warehouse. "I've seen them. The ones inside. Don't belong to this neighborhood." He shifted uncomfortably. "They pay men to keep kids like me quiet, but I'm not stupid." Ethan studied him, noting the wiry strength in his frame and the wariness in his eyes, a look that came from fending for yourself too long. "You see something dangerous, you tell someone you trust," Ethan said. "Don't carry it alone." Derek hesitated, then leaned closer. "They always meet in the back room, the one near the shrimp nets. I used to sleep in there before they took it over." His gaze flicked to Rook, then back to Ethan. "That dog'll smell trouble before you do." "Listen to him." With that, he pedaled off, vanishing into the fog like a ghost. Moments later, Clara returned. "Guard's armed. He's not just there for show." Ethan told her what Derek had shared, and she nodded slowly. "Kid's right. That room is where they're comfortable, which means it's where they'll leave things behind." Together, they approached the warehouse from the service dock. Rook moved ahead, his paws soundless despite his size. Ethan eased the side door open, pushing and lifting, just as Derek had described, the latch barely whispering. Inside, the air was cool and metallic, the smell of salt mixed with machine oil. Shadows pooled across crates stacked high, and faint voices echoed from deeper inside. They crept forward until the back room came into view, through a narrow gap. Papers littered a table, a laptop lay open, and Evelyn Shaw stood with her arms crossed, her tailored coat neat despite the damp air. She was in her early 40s, slender with sharp cheekbones and a mane of dark hair swept into a twist. Her reputation had always been one of efficiency, but tonight, her composure radiated control, as if she were the one orchestrating every move. Beside her, Bobby Langston leaned casually against a crate, his broad frame filling the space. His sandy hair was slicked back, his smile easy, but his eyes cold. Their voices carried. "By Thursday he won't have a choice," Evelyn said, her tone like glass. Bobby chuckled low. "He never sees it coming. Always thought trust was a virtue, but trust is leverage, and leverage breaks men like Cole." Ethan's jaw tightened. Clara placed a hand lightly on his arm, cautioning him to stay still. Rook bristled but made no sound. From deeper in the warehouse came footsteps, heavier, deliberate. A third man entered, his raincoat long and damp from outside. His face was shadowed, but Ethan recognized the silhouette, the same figure who had been watching him on more than one occasion. The man carried a folder, which he dropped on the table. "It's all lined up," he said, his voice low, gravelly. "He won't last the week." Clara's eyes narrowed. She mouthed silently, "Proof." They needed those documents. But even as Ethan calculated how to grab them, Evelyn's head turned sharply, her gaze cutting toward the door, as though she sensed the shift in the air. Ethan and Clara ducked back into shadow, hearts pounding. Rook pressed against Ethan's leg, tense. "Something wrong?" Bobby asked. Evelyn's lips curved faintly. "Just a feeling." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the ice machine. Then Evelyn shrugged and returned to her papers. Ethan and Clara exchanged a glance. The risk was rising, but the information was too valuable to leave behind. They would need a plan, and fast. The fog over Charleston thickened again by dawn, curling low across the harbor like pale smoke rising from unseen fires. Detective Ethan Cole hadn't slept. The images from the warehouse replayed in his mind. Evelyn Shaw's cold certainty, Bobby Langston's mocking grin, and the faceless man in the raincoat, whose presence pressed heavier than any words. Rook had curled at the foot of the bed, but stirred at the faintest sound, restless as though he too sensed the game tightening. By mid-morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table of Martha's home, coffee gone cold in his hands. Martha Blake was in her early 60s, short and sturdy, with a broad frame that carried strength even age hadn't diminished. Her hair, once chestnut, was streaked fully with silver, worn in a bun, pinned high with stubborn neatness. She had been a nurse for most of her life before retiring, though the war stories she carried from long nights in the emergency ward had given her a sharp, pragmatic toughness. Martha had agreed to watch over Lila, but her hospitality came with boundaries. Her home was orderly, her rules strict, and she believed in honesty spoken plain. At the moment, she was at the stove, frying eggs with the same precision she once used for surgical sutures. Lila sat at the counter, her thin legs swinging as she nibbled on toast. The girl's storm-gray eyes seemed older than her years, but this morning, a rare trace of childlike light softened them. She wore a pale yellow sweater Martha had knitted overnight, the sleeves still loose but warm. "You look like you've been run over by a truck," Martha remarked to Ethan without looking back. Her voice carried a drawl, softened by years of Charleston air, but edged with dry humor. "Whatever you're chasing, it's chewing you up." Ethan forced a faint smile. "It's nothing new. It's something if it keeps you up and makes that dog of yours pace like a restless spirit." Martha slid a plate toward him. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Before Ethan could reply, a knock came at the door, quick and firm. Rook sprang up, hackles rising, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Martha set her spatula down and exchanged a glance with Ethan. He rose slowly, hand brushing the holster at his hip, and moved to the door. Standing outside was Pastor Samuel Brooks. He was in his late 60s, tall and lean, with shoulders that stooped slightly from years bent over scripture and service. His skin was weathered, his hair white and closely cropped, and his eyes carried a sorrowful wisdom that came from listening to too many confessions. He had been a mentor to Ethan in his youth, though they hadn't spoken in years. Today his expression was grave, raincoat damp, a leather-bound Bible tucked beneath his arm. "Ethan," he said softly, "may I come in?" Martha let him through, though her posture was cautious. "Don't track mud on my rug." Brooks settled into a chair, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed gently on Lila. "So, this is the child." His voice carried warmth. "You've been braver than most grown men, I hear." Lila lowered her eyes, but a small smile tugged at her lips. Ethan sat across from Brooks, his voice low. "Why are you here, Pastor?" Brooks's hands tightened around the Bible. "Because your name is being whispered in the wrong corners of this city. And last night, I heard something I could not ignore." He leaned forward. "Bobby Langston met with men tied not just to contracts, but to political favors. They are preparing to strip you of more than your badge, Ethan. They want your voice silenced entirely." Ethan's jaw clenched. "How do you know this?" "I keep ears in places most avoid. Sometimes confession doesn't happen in church." Brooks's eyes darkened. "You're walking into a storm not meant for one man alone." Before Ethan could reply, Martha's phone buzzed on the counter. She answered, her tone clipped. "Hello? Who is this?" Her brows furrowed. "Ethan, it's for you." Ethan took the phone. A voice crackled through the line. Clara Reynolds. "Cole, I've tracked the raincoat man. He's been seen near the battery again. Same hour, same posture. He's not hiding anymore. He wants you to know he's watching." Ethan's chest tightened. "Where are you now?" "Station side," Clara said. "I've also traced Evelyn's movements. She's been at the Palmer Club every night this week, meetings with men tied to shell accounts. If we want proof that sticks, that's where we'll find it." Ethan's mind raced. The Palmer Club was old Charleston's hidden fortress, a private hall where deals too dirty for daylight were made under crystal chandeliers. Breaking in would be near impossible, But if Evelyn had grown careless, maybe there was a way. When he hung up, Martha crossed her arms. "Whatever you're planning, don't drag that child into it." Lila's voice cut in, quiet but firm. "I can help. I've been hiding and listening my whole life. People don't notice me." Her small hands gripped the edge of the counter. "That's my strength." Ethan's heart twisted. She was too young to carry that kind of weight, yet her gray eyes held no hesitation. "Not this time," he said gently. "You've done more than enough." Pastor Brooks placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "Sometimes the bravest act is letting others protect you." The girl's lips pressed together, but she nodded, though reluctance lingered in her posture. That night, Ethan and Clara met again, this time near the Palmer Club. The building stood tall on a cobblestone street, its facade grand with white columns and polished brass lanterns. From inside, muted laughter and the clink of glasses drifted into the mist. Wealthy patrons came and went, cloaked in suits and evening dresses. Clara wore a dark blazer, her braid tucked beneath a cap, blending into the shadows. "2 exits, heavy security in the front," she whispered, "but service staff rotate through the alley every half hour. If we're quick, we can slip in with deliveries." Ethan nodded. Rook stood at his side, posture tense. They waited until a catering van pulled up, 2 young men unloading trays. Clara slipped behind them, Ethan close behind, and within seconds they were inside, moving through narrow halls that smelled of polished wood and cigar smoke. They reached a side corridor that opened toward the main lounge. Through the half-open door, Ethan saw Evelyn Shaw seated with Bobby Langston at a mahogany table. Around them were 3 other men, all middle-aged, wearing tailored suits and the smug expressions of men accustomed to power. Papers lay spread across the table, and a ledger thick with handwritten notes sat in front of Evelyn. Clara leaned close. "If we can get that ledger—" Before she could finish, Rook growled low, ears flat. Ethan followed his gaze. At the far end of the hall, the raincoat man stood, half in shadow, watching them with unblinking focus. His presence was silent, suffocating. He did not move closer, but Ethan knew the man's patience had limits. Clara gripped his arm. "Not now. We need that proof." Ethan's pulse hammered as they edged closer to the lounge. Voices carried clearer now. "Thursday evening," Evelyn said, her tone sharp. "Cole will walk right into it. He thinks he still has allies." Bobby chuckled. "By the time he realizes, it'll be signed, sealed, done." Ethan's jaw clenched. Clara's eyes hardened. The words were the same rhythm as before, only this time scrawled into Evelyn's ledger. If they could capture even a fragment, it would be enough to unravel the scheme. But as they pressed forward, the raincoat man shifted slightly, and Ethan realized their window was shrinking. Rook stiffened, a low snarl rising. Ethan touched the dog's head to steady him, his mind racing with choices. They had the chance to secure undeniable proof, or risk everything by being discovered too soon. The fog was just beginning to lift over Charleston as Ethan Cole and Clara Reynolds crouched in the darkened corridor of the Palmer Club. The polished oak floors gleaming faintly under dim sconces. The air smelled of cigar smoke and expensive bourbon, the laughter of men too sure of themselves drifting from the lounge. Rook, the 6-year-old German shepherd, stood stiff at Ethan's side, ears pinned forward, amber eyes locked on the far shadows where the raincoat man had appeared. Ethan's pulse thundered. He knew the man wasn't there by accident. Inside the lounge, Evelyn Shaw sat like a queen at her table, posture elegant, her auburn hair catching the low light as she turned the ledger pages with manicured fingers. Bobby Langston lounged beside her, tailored gray suit sharp as his smile, the same smile Ethan once trusted for 15 years. Around them were 3 men, power brokers from Charleston's inner circle. One was Walter Hensley, a banker in his early 50s, broad-shouldered with a ruddy face and small, calculating eyes. Another, Arthur Keene, a wiry politician with thinning blonde hair slicked back, his posture always leaning forward as if eager to pounce. The last was Judge Samuel Crowley, tall and stooped in his 60s, his lined face pale under the glow, spectacles perched on his nose. He had a reputation for bending rulings when the right pocket was lined. Clara leaned close, her voice a whisper. "If we can get that ledger and walk out, we can end this without blood." Ethan shook his head. They're not going to let it go easy. And he's here. He nodded toward the far end where the raincoat man had shifted again, watching. His face remained obscured by shadow, but the slow, deliberate movement of his shoulders told Ethan he was no mere bystander. Back at Martha Blake's house, Lila sat by the window, her storm-gray eyes fixed on the street. She had promised Ethan she would stay, but her chest ached with worry. Martha, sturdy in her plain cotton dress, bustled about the kitchen with controlled calm, but her eyes darted off into the clock. Pastor Brooks sat in an armchair, Bible open on his knees, though his gaze lingered on Lila. "He'll come back," Brooks said gently. Lila shook her head. "They'll hurt him if he's alone." Her voice cracked, but beneath it was steel. She had survived alleys and warehouses. She knew predators when she saw them. She rose suddenly, slipping her small notebook and pencil into her pocket. Martha turned sharply. "Where do you think you're going?" "To help him," Lila said firmly. Martha's face softened with worry. She had seen too many young ones try to be braver than their bodies allowed. But she also saw the raw determination in the child's thin frame, sweater sleeves hanging over her wrists. Martha sighed and pressed a worn brass key into Lila's palm. "If you must go, take the back alley. And don't you dare go without this it." It was her way of giving permission without condoning it. Meanwhile, Ethan and Clara edged closer to the lounge. Through the narrow gap, they caught Evelyn's voice sharp as glass. "Thursday is ours. Cole will be finished, and no one will question it. Not with these men here to bless the transition." Bobby chuckled low, tapping his whiskey glass. "By the time he realizes, it'll be sealed. He won't even see the knife until it's in his back." Clara's jaw clenched. "We need them on record." Ethan nodded. He slipped a small recorder from his coat, different from the one Lily had hidden, but every bit as precise. Yet before he could activate it, the raincoat man stepped forward, his boots clicking against the floorboards. He was tall, early 40s, with a gaunt face framed by dark stubble, his raincoat worn at the cuffs, eyes pale and hollow. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "Detective Cole." The laughter in the lounge stopped. Chairs scraped. Bobby and Evelyn's heads whipped toward the hall. Ethan and Clara stepped into view, Rook growling low. "Well," Bobby drawled, adjusting his cufflinks, "if it isn't my old friend. Couldn't resist joining us?" Ethan's eyes locked on the raincoat man. "Who is he?" Evelyn's smile curved. "Someone who makes sure problems disappear." The man's hand hovered near his coat pocket. Rook lunged forward with a thunderous bark, teeth bared. The room froze, tension tight as wire. Clara's voice cut through. "You think this city will let you play kings forever? We've got your words, your plans, your ledger. It's over," Arthur Keene sneered. "You've got nothing. This is Charleston. Truth bends to money." But then a new voice rose from the doorway, small, fierce. "Not if everyone hears it." All eyes turned. Lila stood framed by the hall, breathless from running, hair tangled, clutching the brass key in one fist and her small notebook in the other. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Lila, no!" She stepped closer, her thin frame shaking but her gray eyes steady. "I heard everything. I can repeat it, and I've already written it down." She held up her notebook, its pages filled with quick scrawls. "Even if you take their papers, you can't take my memory." The raincoat man's pale eyes flickered with uncertainty. For the first time, Evelyn's composure cracked. "Get her out!" she snapped. But before anyone could move, Rook surged forward, his body a shield between the men and the child, his growl shaking the paneled walls. Clara leveled her weapon, voice sharp. "Nobody moves!" The room erupted in chaos. Bobby lunged toward the ledger, but Ethan intercepted, shoving him back against the table. Papers scattered like falling leaves. Judge Crowley scrambled for the door, only to be blocked by Rook's snapping jaws. Evelyn reached for her phone, but Lila darted forward, small fingers, snatching the device and hurling it into the fireplace where it shattered against iron. Sparks hissed. Walter Hensley, the banker, tried to shove past Clara, but she twisted his arm sharply, slamming him against the wall with surprising strength. Her braid fell loose, but her stance held firm. Arthur Keene muttered curses, but his eyes darted like a cornered rat. Amid the noise, the raincoat man froze. He was watching Lila, not with malice now, but with something unsettled, almost recognition. Slowly he lowered his hand from his pocket. His hollow eyes lingered on the girl's steady gaze. Then, without a word, he turned and slipped into the mist outside, vanishing as if the fog swallowed him whole. By the time uniformed officers stormed the Palmer Club, summoned earlier by Clara's quiet text, the scene was secure. Bobby and Evelyn were cuffed, their protests falling flat against the recorder Ethan produced and Lila's written notes. Judge Crowley sat slumped, head in his hands, while Hensley and Keene shouted about misunderstandings. The ledger lay open, every damning detail preserved. Outside, the dawn broke fully, sunlight piercing the fog. Lila stood on the steps, clutching Rook's thick fur. Ethan crouched beside her, his voice low but steady. "You should never have followed, but you saved us." She gave a faint smile, eyes tired but proud. "You once gave me food when I was starving. Tonight, I gave you truth." Clara stepped closer, her dark eyes softening. "And that truth will change everything." As the sun climbed higher, the three of them, Ethan, Lila, and Clara, with Rook standing guard, watched as Bobby and Evelyn were driven away in black cars. Martha's figure appeared at the edge of the crowd, hands on her hips, worry lines deepening. When she spotted Lila safe, her stern face melted into relief. Pastor Brooks stood nearby, murmuring quiet prayers as the crowd of curious onlookers grew. For Ethan, the weight that had pressed against his chest for weeks finally lifted. The betrayal was exposed. The city's rot was dragged into daylight. And in the midst of it all, he had found something more enduring than power or reputation. He had found family. This story reminds us that even in the darkest nights, God sends his light through unexpected messengers. A frightened little girl, a loyal German shepherd, and a weary officer became instruments of hope, proof that the Lord still works miracles in the quiet corners of our lives. In your own journey, you may face betrayal, loneliness, or fear, but never forget, God is always near, guiding you, protecting you, and lifting you up when you cannot walk alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder of his love. Leave a comment below with your thoughts and subscribe for more stories that celebrate faith, courage, and redemption. And if you believe in the miracles of God, type Amen in the comments. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones today and always.